One of Tufte's guidelines for visualizing data that I really love is increase data density, where you're dedicating the graphic to the display of the data. And we do that by maximizing the data matrix. That's the data graphic, and we want it to fill the available space. And then within the data matrix itself, we want to maximize the data. And so that includes increasing the density of the data. Sometimes you do this by shrinking graphics, creating little micro charts, for example. And you always need to balance when you're doing this legibility with information. So you want to pack as much information as you can in there, but do it in a way that it doesn't overwhelm your audience. If you look at the graphic on the right, you can see some examples of this guideline for increasing data density. This is a graphic that shows tasks completed by team members, including some fields like team member, the total task completed with a number of little micro charts, and then the actual data itself listed by the number of tasks completed from week 1 through week 26. So if we just presented this table as a table without the total task completed field, then the data is still there, and I think your audience could pick up some of the trends in it, but it's really hard to see the overall trends and some of the important data points. And so by adding the total task completed with the microchart and information, you can really visualize very easily the productivity of each team member. So some techniques for increasing data density include highlighting the microdata with the macro. And if we look at our graphic on the right, we can see that the macro is the trend line. That's the gray line that we can see from week 1 to week 26. And then the micro data are the individual data points that show the highs and lows in productivity, the red and the green dots. And so I can at a glance see, for example, that Julie had a slow start but has been productive ever since. And Josh has been kind of inconsistent and has in the last few months been relatively unproductive. Another technique is layer and separate data. Again, if you look at the graphic on the right, you can see in the total task completed field where the trend line is a light gray line. It's still important, right? Because it's showing the overall trend, but it's the individual data points, the reds and the green, that we really want to highlight. So we utilize color to emphasize and de-emphasize the various elements. Shrink graphics with small multiples. Small multiples are a great way to make comparisons between data, and so it's very easy to see where one element is trending up compared to another, for example. Again, if we look at the team members, we can see from the small multiple charts that, for example, John started off slow, got really good, and then took a big break, and then his productivity picked up. But if we go down to Jabba the Hutt, we can see that his productivity was pretty dismal throughout most of the trend. And we can make those comparisons because the only thing that's changing is the data in the graphs. And so because the shape of the graphs change, we can compare those shapes. In some ways, the next graphic, which is the little triangle that shows up and down, is also both a small multiple and using color to convey data. And so the small multiple is just the triangle, and the only change is flipping it, right, up or down, and then changing the color. But in doing that, it makes it very easy to see the overall trend of which team members' overall productivity is increasing or decreasing. Last, you want to show change over time. And again, we've packed a lot of data in here from week 1 to week 26, but we can utilize these microcharts, or what we refer to as spark lines, to show change over time. The last guideline for visualizing data is apply aesthetic elegance. The goal being that good design is invisible. If you're looking at the visualization and appreciating the colors or the shape or the neat lines or the font and the title, then you've lost your audience. That design needs to be there, but it needs to be there in a way that it frames and emphasizes the data itself, so it focuses the audience on your story. And so you need to thoughtfully choose the format and design based on your purpose and your audience. You need to display an accessible complexity of data. So you don't want to have too little data because then your audience moves on too quick. But if you have too much and it's not thoughtfully displayed, you can overwhelm your audience, and again, they'll move on. And so you want to pack as much data as you can in there, but do it in a way that it's accessible. You want to combine words, numbers, and drawings together. That makes for very compelling graphics and the ability for the user to analyze the data. The details matter. If somebody sees an error in your presentation, even if it's just one small error, they will often apply it to the whole analysis. So you really need to think about the way you're presenting the data, that there's no errors in the data, and that the choices you're making about the graphic presentation enhance and don't detract from the presentation. Last, you want to tell your story. And this is a thread that you'll hear throughout your entire career at ACCGIS, in which we need to look at the data, figure out what the compelling story is, and then use visualization to tell that story. That's when you can really hook your audience. The graphic on the right is a great example of aesthetic elegance. This is a map that I procured from a gentleman that lived on the East Coast who found this map in his uncle's attic, and it represents the maps used for the D-Day invasion. So these were beyond top secret. These were called bigot maps. And the reason why they were so secretive is because if the enemy got the maps before the invasion, then it would be very easy to defeat the invasion. And so they created these maps, but only circulated them among a small audience until the day of the invasion. And then the maps were actually loaded on the boats with the troops and distributed on the boats so they could restrict how many people actually saw these maps. And this map does a really great job of thoughtfully choosing the format and design. It's a single map front and back. You can think the troops need to look at it to see where they're going to invade, but they also need to have all kinds of other information because they didn't know exactly what day the invasion was going to be. And so the back of the map includes a range of information about moons and tides across an entire calendar, so that when they finally picked the go day, then you could flip to the back of the map and understand what phase the moon was going to be, or how high the tide was going to be. There's an accessible complexity to this data. Both the backside with all the charts and graphs are very easy to interpret, but the front side has an incredible amount of information as well. You've got the de-emphasized base map in the back, which includes like the green hedgerows, for example, and the brown contours. And then on top of that, you've got red data, which was the actually most updated troop positions and position of things like hedgehogs and tank ditches that were going to be relevant for the invasion. It also combines words, numbers, and drawings together. You can see the drawings on the map and some labels. You can also see at the very bottom of the map a watercolor panorama of the actual shoreline that you would see as you approach from the coast. So the idea is you kind of not only needed to know what your coordinates and where you needed to land, but once you got close enough, you could say, hey, I just need to be right or left of that tower on the horizon. And so it made it very easy to use the map. So this is a really wonderful example of applying aesthetic elegance. To wrap up Tufte's guidelines for visualizing data, the goal here is to seek to learn, not confirm. If you strive to create visualizations that pack a lot of data in there in a way that your audience can understand and allow them to come to their own conclusions, that is much more powerful than just presenting the answer. And so our goal is to use these guidelines for visualizing data to present our analysis in a way that draws our audience in and allows them to come to their own conclusions.